A new era has begun in Starkville, Mississippi, as Jeff Lebby takes over as the head coach of the Mississippi State Bulldogs. Helping us break down all things Hail State in the 2024 season, Robbie Faulk of Maroon and White Daily, which is the On3 affiliate for Mississippi State. He's also doing a number of different things. A writer for the Starkville Daily News, co-host of the Thunder and Lightning podcast. Robbie, appreciate you taking the time from your very busy schedule, my friend.
Yeah, man, I appreciate. I was doing a lot of things this morning. I was cutting down trees to get ready for outdoor fire. When football season comes on, I was, watching wrestling. I mean, I'm glad I was able to map out a few minutes for you today because I was super busy.
Well, Robbie, I appreciate it, man. We're getting closer to kickoff. Excited to talk all things Bulldogs. That being so, let's get into it. Before, Robbie, we look ahead of the 2024 season, just really quickly, let's look back at 2023 and kind of how we got where we are now. Dogs go 5-7, 1-7 in SEC play. As we obviously all know, Zach Arnett is relieved of his duties late in that 2023 season. And then Jeff Lebby is hired. Just talk about 2023 because it was a really unique year for Mississippi State after the tragic passing, obviously, of the late, great Mike Leach. And I thought Zach Arnett did the very best he could at trying to kind of galvanize that fan base and that community. But also there were some mistakes when it came to how the offense was handled and some other things. And you saw that play out on the field. So when Mississippi State fans, when folks like yourself, when you look back at the 2023 season, I mean, what stands out to you for Mississippi State?
It was just, chaos, turmoil. No, I mean, there was really no stability in it. And it was that kind of deviated away from what Mike Leach was, right? I mean, Mike Leach, his entire career was stability. You can go back and you can talk about the quirky things about him and the funny press conferences and stuff like that. But at the root, he was a football coach and a program master. He did it at 3 different schools as a head coach in the Power 5. And at 3 places that traditionally were not great. I mean, you look at what Texas Tech has done since he's left. They're still searching for that stability. Washington State was, 2-3 win team when he inherited them. He took that team to 11 wins. Mississippi State was a little bit different. State had enjoyed some success in the 2010s with Dan Mullen. Dan Mullen did a lot of had ran his program a lot like Mike Leach did. I think in a lot of ways, he was a little more adaptive, I guess you could say. He was willing to adapt to his personnel a little more than Mike Leach. Mike Leach was more, we got to fit you guys into this offense. But again, at the root of it, Mike Leach brought stability to programs. And I think as long as he would have been at Mississippi State, even in this era of football, State would have been a team that was consistently going to bowl games, somewhere between 6 and 9 wins, maybe one year getting 10 wins, because they were on the verge of doing that in 2022. They were a 9-win team. You could have very easily won 1 or 2 more games. Kind of the same thing in 2021. There was 2 or 3 games there for the taking. So you lose that stability, and you replace a guy that's been a head coach in college football for 20 years at that point with a guy that's never coached a down as a head coach. He's never run his own program. And, you start there at the day that Mike Leach fell ill, and a couple of days later he's gone. While you're preparing for a bowl game, to all of a sudden you got the defensive coordinator leading the team that's never led a program in his life. And I thought we saw some good things early. I thought they closed the recruiting class pretty strong. Obviously, they won the bowl game, the ReliQuest Bowl, and there were definitely some issues in that game as far as game management, but that's to be expected with a staff that was kind of a skeleton crew at that point. And you go into the offseason, you have a little bit of juice because it really felt like Zach Arnett was a Mississippi State guy. He's a guy from New Mexico that grew up kind of blue collar, grew up in that similar environment as Mississippi State. You got to work for what you want. Everybody's looking down on you. You're an underdog. He's always had that mentality. You add in the fact that he's a 3-3-5 guy, which is kind of Mississippi State's identity going back to the late 90s with Jolie Dunn. It felt like a really good fit. And I guess we started to see some of the early cracks in the offseason with, the offense it was a little scary with what Kevin Barbay was bringing. It was very old school offense. Didn't really match with the current offensive schemes of the SEC. And, you're starting to wonder, is Mississippi State going to be able to run this in this league and do it with Will Rogers at quarterback and the personnel that they had? That personnel was built for the air raid. And, those issues came to play in the season. Mississippi State had the worst offense that they've produced since the Sylvester Croom era. So, I think it was a situation where you had a guy running a program that was not ready and was not really fit for that position. But at the same time, it's something that Mississippi State's administration felt like they had to do because players were getting contacted while Mike Leach is in the hospital, were getting contacted to enter the portal by coaches in this league. And that continued after, Mike Leach had passed away. And it was kind of chaos there for a second because the players are not around each other. The coaches are away from them at the time. And they had to make a move, and they felt like the best thing to do to keep the program together was to keep Zach Arnett. And it didn't work out, but I think that we've seen in the last few months a little more stability coming back to the surface with Jeff Lebby. I know he's never been a head coach before, but he's a son of a coach. He's been around some really good ones over the last 10 years. It looks like this program is a lot more stable than it was 7 months ago.
And Robbie, that's a great segue into, I want to talk about Jeff Lebby entering his first season. Maybe we're getting some exciting offense back in Starkville as well, which feels like it's become sort of part of the brand of Hail State. Just talk about Jeff Lebby, the excitement around him and the optimism for him building this program, not just in this season, but throughout his tenure as well.
Well, one of the things that was very apparent late last season, I think, and it was especially whenever the move was made by Zach Selman to make a coaching change after that Texas A&M game, I think what was apparent there was Mississippi State has to have an exciting offense. You cannot continue to put that kind of offense on the field. And I'm going to be honest with you, people were not super thrilled with what they were seeing in the air raid. It kind of had become a ball control offense, and maybe that had to do with the personnel. I don't know. But, there wasn't a lot of excitement in that either. They were putting up points. They were putting up yards. But there were some things that were left to be desired there too. So this fan base is kind of tired of that blue-collar moniker and the whole, relying on defense thing. They want to score points. They want to light the scoreboard up because that's the name of the game, especially these days. Everybody has an exciting offense, at least the ones that are contending for playoffs. And ultimately, that's Mississippi State's goal. It's, everybody in the SEC now has a chance. Maybe outside of Vanderbilt until we see otherwise. Everybody in the SEC outside of Vanderbilt maybe feels like they have a shot within a reasonable amount of time to be inside that top 12 and to make it to the playoffs. Mississippi State has been number one in the country in the last 10 years. They've been in the top 15, the top 20 fairly regularly. So the goal is to get to the playoffs. And to do that, I don't think you can do it without having an offense that can go toe-to-toe with some of the best defenses in the country. I think if you look at the top 12 teams this year when they get in the playoffs, every single one of those teams are going to have an offense that's going to be able to move the ball and score points against really good defenses. So that was the goal, is to try to go out there and find somebody that has an exciting offense, that has, a persona about him that's going to be able to recruit at a high level, that knows this conference, that knows this area. And this is a guy that did it just down the road at Ole Miss. I mean, every offense now that he has run, UCF, Ole Miss, Oklahoma, and you can obviously argue that at Ole Miss and UCF that those head coaches had a little more input than Brent Venables did, obviously. But everything that we hear is that he had a tremendous amount of input in those offenses. All those offenses were top 10 nationally. So he's done it everywhere he's been, and there's no reason to believe he can't do it at Mississippi State as well. So I think Mississippi State got them one of the best offensive minds in the country, one of the best play callers in the country, and we'll see what he's able to do leading a program for the first time. But early returns have been good. I know the people that have been around Jeff Lebby that know him well believe that he will do well as a head coach Obviously, time will tell this year because he has arguably the toughest schedule in the SEC.
Robbie, on that note, let's deep dive into the 2024 Bulldogs. You mentioned the offensive side of the football. We'll start there. Again, the offensive attack from Jeff Lebby taking over in Starkville. Since 2019, Jeff Lebby's offenses have finished top 25 nationally in plays of 20 yards or more every season. So to your point, this guy knows offense. He's always had good offenses. They've always scored a lot of points. That's the goal, obviously, at Mississippi State. Blake Shapen taking over as your QB1. He's a former all Big 12 player. I thought was one of the more underrated pickups, honestly, in the transfer portal. He'll be your guy. You've got Jordan Mosley back at wide receiver, the transfer Kelly Akari, who I'm really excited to see coming in from UTEP, and Kevin Coleman, Louisville transfer, looking to make big impacts on the outside. You've got veterans Kevon Lee and Jeffrey Pittman, who will battle it out in the backfield amongst a host of others. You did beef up the offensive line with some transfer portal additions that I think people may be sleeping on. But the thing that jumped out to me, Robbie, and I'm sure to many others, 0 returning starters on offense. 0. There are 0 starters back from last year. So it's all new at Mississippi State, but new could be much better, obviously, when you look at what the product was last year on the offensive side. So thoughts on Mississippi State's offense, what you're expecting from the first version of Jeff Lebby's offense in Starkville?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I mean, I think it actually is a good thing that Mississippi State has a brand new offense, because that offense last year was putrid. And I don't think it was all on the personnel. I think it was just a terrible fit for what they had returning, and it just didn't work. But this group, I think that is why, and we can talk about that with the defense too, but I think that's why people are so down on Mississippi State this year. And they might be right anyway, but there's a lot of people that think Mississippi State's not going to win a conference game. And I think because of that, it's because the average SEC media, the average SEC fan is looking just like you did on there, and you're seeing there's hardly any wide receivers coming back from last year. There's hardly any running backs coming back. On the surface, it looks bad. But if you break it down, you look at the guys that they added and what they're doing offensively, I like this group a lot. I think it starts up front with the offensive line. That's a big key for them. If that group is not cohesive, that entire offense can fall apart. Just as important as it is for Blake Shapen to be healthy this year and really good, I think it's just as important for that offensive line to be a cohesive unit. You're going to have essentially 5 new starters up front. Albert Reese, who is going back and forth from right tackle to guard, he is the only guy that started any ball games for Mississippi State up front, and he's the only returning player for Mississippi State up front in the projected starters. So that looks tough. You have no returning starters up front. That's not good. But you added some really good pieces. You added one of the top-rated centers in the country, a Pro Football Focus, and Ethan Miner. You rated one of the top left tackles in the country in the transfer portal, in McCollum Pounders, who he might have allowed 1 sack last year at left tackle, pretty strong. It was at Memphis, and this is a pretty big jump, but this is a guy that Mississippi State and Ole Miss both recruited. Jeff Lebby recruited him at Ole Miss, and Mississippi State recruited him as well. He was committed to both schools, ended up at Memphis, but that appears to be a good piece. Marlon Martinez at guard, who was at LSU, was kind of their swing guy at LSU, played a lot of snaps. He might be kind of a wild card for Mississippi State because he is an SEC guy. He's played in this league. And then you have Jacoby Jackson, who was at Texas Tech and was really good at Texas Tech. So the line, while they don't have any experience in Mississippi State hardly, it's a talented group. So I like that group. I love the wide receivers. This is probably one of Mississippi State's deepest wide receiver groups that they've had. A talented group. And I talked to Chad Bumpus, who is a former Mississippi State Bulldog himself. He's a wide receiver coach at Mississippi State. He came in at the start of the Dan Mullen era, and he was kind of the beginning of changing the culture. And he sees a lot of similarities with Mississippi State under Lebby in year 1 here. And I talked to him about the fact that Mississippi State, get ready for this, they have not had a wide receiver drafted since 1995. And most of these players, all of these players were not even born. Most of them don't even know who that was. You and I might know who that was. Eric Moulds, who was a Buffalo Bills great. He was the last guy that was drafted at wide receiver for Mississippi State. So that's what's facing them here. They have got to get over that hump and get some guys in the league. and be able to recruit some big-time wide receivers. But I like this group. Kelly Akari, I think, is a guy who could be Mississippi State's alpha, 1,000-yard receiver at UTEP. This offense fits him to a T. Kevin Coleman is a potential breakout candidate who was great at Jackson State, did some really good things for Louisville last year. Creed Whittemore, we're not talking much about him. He had a huge first game last year as a true freshman and then kind of disappeared when I think the coaches were trying to force feed guys like Tolu Smith. I mean, not Tolu Smith, he's a basketball player. Tulu Griffin. And also Xavier Thomas is at LSU now. They were trying to keep those guys healthy, happy. And I think that they kind of let Creed slip into the background. He's a guy that could break through this year as well. And then Seydou Traore at tight end. Mississippi State has not used the tight end very well over the years. I think this is a guy that no one's talking about right now. But I think by middle of the season in the SEC, you're going to know his name. A lot of people are going to be talking about this guy. He was at Arkansas State, led the team in receptions and yards at Arkansas State as a tight end. Comes from England, didn't play a lot of football growing up, and goes to Arkansas State, blows up, ends up with Deion Sanders at Colorado State. I think things kind of fell apart for him. He had to sit out last year. He's going to be a breakout candidate for State this year. I think you'll be talking about him in the middle of the season, much like a lot of people did with a guy like Kenny Yeboah, who was at Ole Miss when Jeff Lebby first got there. I think he can have that kind of impact. And then finally, the running backs. I mean, they added Devon Booth, who I think was great at Utah State. I think he fits this offense really well. He can do a really good job with the explosive plays for Mississippi State. And Johnny Daniels, a junior college transfer, one of the top running backs in the country in junior college last year. He had a breakthrough spring and has been really good this summer. So a lot of competition there. And a lot of people don't think about the running game when it comes to Jeff Lebby, but it is the center of his offense. And if you look at what he's done in the running game in the past, that's been an underrated part of his offenses. So I expect that group to break out as well. I like the personnel. We haven't seen them all play together much, but I think it has a chance to be a really good offense.
So, Robbie, let's switch sides of the football and talk the defense, because I feel like if there's questions, this one may be the bigger of the two sides, because you got a first-time defensive coordinator in Coleman Hutzler, a guy who's been all over the SEC, has coached special teams, has coached defense, now again getting his first crack at being a defensive coordinator in Starkville. 7 of your top 8 tacklers from 2023 are gone. DeMonte Russell is the lone starter returning up front. You do pick up South Carolina transfer Stone Blanton, who's a Mississippi guy, great baseball player too, by the way. He slides in at linebacker. He's going to replace and help replace Nathaniel Watson and Jet Johnson. That's the big questions. Who's going to replace those guys and their production in the middle? Both were 100 tackle per season kind of players. Corey Ellington, the lone returner in the secondary. And I guess, Robbie, my question for you is this. Number one, what you're expecting from the defensive side, Coleman Hutzler, his first time as a DC. But, what I hear from people is that, hey, at least the thought process is, and you're right, there's a lot of doubters out there, but people seem to think Mississippi State's going to score, but can they stop anyone this season? Do you think that's fair? Are people sleeping on this defense? And your thoughts on this group heading in the year?
No, I think it's totally fair. It's definitely going to be a watch and see kind of thing, because Coleman Hutzler, he was a co-defensive coordinator before, I think, at Texas, but he was kind of, I think that was more of a title. I don't think he was actually calling the plays. I think this is the first time that he is going to be really taking charge there. And, Matt Barnes is his co-defensive coordinator. I think he's going to have a lot of input as well. He's actually, I think, had the experience calling plays before. Worked at Ohio State, was at Memphis last year, obviously. So it's a total unknown at this point. Neither of these guys have really been fully engulfed in this position, especially on this level. But what I'll say about Coleman is he has been highly respected by some of the great defensive minds in college football. Worked for Nick Saban. He has the background with Will Muschamp. There's a lot of great defensive coaches that have had him on his staff, and I refuse to believe that he hasn't learned something from those guys. He's actually, in many ways, more experienced than Zach Arnett was when Zach Arnett came to Mississippi State. So the hope is that you have, a young star. You have a guy that is that Jeff Lebby just saw it before everybody else and pulled the trigger, and he's a guy that is about to explode. That's the hope, but you just don't know that. I know in my time around him, as limited as that's been, because we haven't had a lot of time to see practices, but in the practices that we've seen and getting back to spring, he is a extremely energetic personality out there. And the defense kind of, it takes the personality of its coach. And I think that this defense, what it might lack in talent, what it might lack in experience, I think they're going to make up for it in aggressiveness and flying to the ball, things like that. And then when you do that, I think that the chances of giving up some big plays are there, but the chances of creating some big plays for yourself are always there as well. And I think that's important for this team because I don't think they're going to be as talented or as experienced as most of the offenses they're going up against. But if they can create turnovers, if they can get stops inside the red zone where you're forcing field goals instead of touchdowns and your offense is scoring a lot of points, that makes all the difference in the world. So I think that they're going to be better than people think they're going to be. And, that might just be the late training camp high. I don't know. You start getting closer to the season, you start going from, hey, maybe this team can get to a bowl game to maybe this team can slip into the playoffs. That's where things are right now, Mississippi State fans. Like, if you could just sneak a couple of games. So I think that, that probably has something to do with it. There's a lot more positivity coming out right now. Jeff Lebby talked the other day about this group dominating in practice. So we'll see if that's the case. But I do think that there's some nice pieces there. I think the linebacker core is starting to come together. I really like the safety group, actually. I think the safety group has a chance to be really good with some of the JUCO guys and transfer portal guys that they got, and then the linebackers as well. We'll see on cornerbacks. That's a really thin group there and very young, but they do have some really talented players there like Kelly Jones, who's a redshirt freshman, one of the fastest guys on the team, a guy that's like 6'4", not your average cornerback length, but he has a lot of speed and some good coverage skills. So I like him a lot. We'll see what happens with him. And the defensive line is a big question mark. Travion Williams is a impact player, future NFL guy if he's healthy. But the question is whether or not he's going to be healthy. He was hurt 3 games in last year, and we didn't see him again. If you get a fully healthy Travion Williams, that will be a player that everybody's talking about in the SEC. He has that kind of talent. He can be the next great Mississippi State defensive lineman. So you need him to be healthy and step up. You need DeMonte Russell to really step up. Calvin Dinkins inside. There's a lot of players that have got to be really good for Mississippi State this year to be competitive on the defensive side.
Robbie, let's talk a little special teams. Kyle Ferry is back as your kicker, went 16 for 22 on field goals a season ago. Southeast Missouri State transfer Zachary Haynes taking over as the punter. And I think the big question, obviously, when it comes to special teams, who replaces Tulu Griffin in the return game? He was such an electric playmaker for you. So when you look at special teams, and again, for a team like Mississippi State or really any in the SEC, when you're out here trying to steal wins and pull some upsets, special teams a lot of times can be that thing that can flip a game on its head. So anything notable in regards to Bulldogs special teams going into this season?
I think that as far as the kicking game is concerned, that's going to be a much better group, I think, than last year. The punters last year really struggled for Mississippi State. They got 2 really good punters this year in Zach Haynes, and I think Nick Barmira can kick it as well. He is probably going to be your kickoff specialist, but that's a guy transferred from UCLA, got hurt early last year, and that's when Kyle Ferry stepped in as a true freshman as the place kicker. But when he got back, he was handling kickoff duties, and he was routinely kicking those out of the end zone. Very few times where teams get a chance to return those. So did a great job as far as your kickoff specialist, and now I think he's going to add a different dimension there at punter. And so I like the kicking game. Really like Kyle Ferry, did some good things for Mississippi State last year. And for a true freshman to come in the league and do that, I thought was impressive. So I think they're going to be in good shape there as far as kicking's concerned. And the special teams, as far as return game, I think that there's some guys there that can really help you. Kevin Coleman obviously did a lot of good things for Louisville, like we talked about. and I think he can help Mississippi State. They're a dynamic player that has the ability to take it back at any time. Has some really good speed, some good agility, great athlete that I think can help Mississippi State in multiple ways, offensively and in special teams. And then, Creed Whittemore, I think, can help Mississippi State in multiple ways as well. I think he's going to help them in the return game. Wouldn't shock me to see a guy like Kelly Akari out there as well. So I think what they're going to do, we talked to special teams coach a couple weeks ago, and he was talking about, their philosophy. And one of the questions I asked him was, do you like to get your best players on the field? Because, a lot of coaches, they use that opportunity to get the younger guys out there, get some early reps and keep their other guys healthy. Some coaches like to put their best athletes on the field, and that's what he wants to do. He's going to put his best athletes out there. That includes the return game, kick and punt, and we'll see what he wants to do game one. But I think we will see Kevin Coleman, Creed Whittemore, maybe even Kelly Akari. The wide receivers are going to play a role, I think, in that return game.
So, Robbie, 2 starters return for Mississippi State. Like we mentioned, it's all new for the Bulldogs. 0 on offense, like I mentioned, 2 on the defensive side. And you mentioned top of the show or top of the conversation, Robbie, maybe the toughest schedule in the SEC. Let's look at that 2024 slate, year 1 of Jeff Lebby, his first slate in the conference. You open up with 3 straight non-conference games, Robbie. Eastern Kentucky's the opener, at Arizona State week 2, and Toledo week 3. A really important 3-week stretch. You want to come out of that 3-0 before you begin SEC play. You open up with the Florida Gators at Davis-Wade Stadium. Then you go to Texas to take on the Longhorns. Bye week, you're at Georgia, Texas A&M, Arkansas, UMass, at Tennessee, another bye week, Missouri, and then at Ole Miss to close out the slate. So like you mentioned, Robbie, it's a difficult schedule as it seems to be every year. But what jumps out to you? What stands out to you when it comes to year 1 of Jeff Lebby and the schedule that he drew?
That first part of the schedule is so big for this team. If they're wanting to get a bowl game, they got to get out of that first part of the schedule alive. And because the back half is just really difficult. You got, in my opinion, those first 4 games need to be wins if you want to get to a bowl game. I'm teetering on 5 or 6 wins for Mississippi State because I think that they'll get the 4 non-conference games. Arizona State's very tricky going on the road. They're going to be playing that game, like 9:30 local or something, or I guess back home. And going across country like that, it's always weird. They had a weird game against Arizona a couple of years ago. So that's a tough game. You need to win your 4 non-conference games, and then you need to steal a couple of games in the SEC play. And one of the 2 games that I think is winnable, although I think they're going to be much better, is Florida. You're playing that game at home. There's a little pressure on Florida this year, a lot of pressure on Billy Napier, and he might actually have the most difficult schedule in the country. That Mississippi State and Florida are neck and neck on the toughest schedule. And I don't know what they're going to be this year. They can be vastly improved and win 6 or 7 games. I don't know, but State needs to win that game. It's at home. You're at that point, if they do what I think they can do and win their first 3 games, you got a lot of momentum going into that. So I think it's a very important ball game. And winning, starting 4-0, starting off strong right there is so big. And I mean, you look at that stretch, you got to play Georgia, Texas, Tennessee, Ole Miss. You play all those teams on the road. That is 4 top 15 teams, I believe, according to the AP poll that just came out today. That's just, improbable for Mississippi State to even find a win in there. So, I chalk all 4 of those games up as losses just on the surface. So then you're looking for, a couple more wins in there. And then, we'll see. They got Missouri at home, which will be a very difficult matchup, but it is at home. It's a tough schedule. I think Arkansas is a very winnable game. Mississippi State has dominated that series in recent years. And it's at home, like I said. So that's a winnable game. Florida, to me, is a toss-up. You need to win those games I mentioned. You need to win all 4 non-conference games. You need to beat Florida and Arkansas. And whatever happens after that, if you somehow do that, is gravy in year one. But it's a very difficult schedule to navigate. But this is life in the SEC, man. This is where things are now. And it's about to get even more difficult because you have two teams that have been, blue bloods, at least in the logo. Texas hasn't lived up to it in recent years, but Oklahoma dominated the Big 12. Texas has all the ability to compete for national championships. You're adding those two pieces into this league. There are very little gimmies anymore on this schedule. So it's going to be like this just about every year.
Robbie, you mentioned the path to a bowl game, and I think that's really fair when it comes to expectations for year one of Jeff Lebby. But you mentioned also like the late camp high or the late August hype that sets in, right? Fans, everybody alike goes from, you keep pretty realistic expectations all summer and all preseason, and then you get close to kickoff, and I think that adrenaline kicks in, and you're like, hey, if this happens, that happens, that happens, and that happens, we could win 9 games. So in your mind, realistic expectations for year one of the Jeff Lebby era in Starkville, and what do you think this fan base is expecting as well? Because, we've put out predictions, others have as well, and I give Mississippi State fans a lot of credit. Their fans are as lively as any on social media, and they'll let you hear it. I mean, they seem to have pretty high hopes and expectations. So, I mean, when you sift through that, what do you feel like the fan base is most excited to see, and what do you think they're expecting in year one of Jeff Lebby? Is it a win total? Is it just the way the product looks? Like, what defines success for him in year one there?
I think, for the fan base, you definitely want to see progress made. You definitely want to see the exciting offense that you've been promised. I think most people, just about everybody, would be happy with a bowl game this year because I think people are realistic to know where things are right now for Mississippi State. It's a rebuild. You got a brand new head coach. They have to be patient with Jeff Lebby. And, dealing with social media, and I'm on message boards every day. That's not going to happen. The first game that Mississippi State starts struggling on a possession, there's going to be people saying, "Why did we hire this guy? He's in over his head. He has no idea what he's doing." But to me and my podcast co-host Brian Haydad on Thunder and Lightning, we look at this season a lot like Dan Mullen's first year. And the parallels are scary. I mean, it really is. The hope is you have another Dan Mullen, maybe even another Dan Mullen that enjoys recruiting more, because I think that's what Jeff Lebby does. I think he is a guy that attacks recruiting. He enjoys a lot more than Dan Mullen. But your hope is you have a guy that runs his program like Dan Mullen did, that was consistently putting Mississippi State in bowl games. Every 2 or 3 years, they're in position to win 9-10 games. That's what the hope is. And if you put the parallels together this year and that 2009 year, it's crazy. The 2008 Mississippi State team, they lost Ole Miss at the end of the season. They didn't go to a bowl game. Things were kind of in disarray. They were looking for somebody that would bring some excitement. And that's what Dan Mullen did. He had a lot of young players. He had a lot of young excitement there at Mississippi State. Season ticket sales were going well. Hey, they played the toughest schedule in the country that year. They played 2 number 1 teams in Florida and Alabama. And what you saw is a 5-win team that was competitive. That's what Mississippi State fans want to see. If this team wins 5 games, but they're putting up points against Georgia, and they're going to Texas, and they're in the ball game in the fourth quarter, and they go to Ole Miss, and I mean, heaven forbid they somehow win that like they did in 2009. I'm not making that prediction, but hey, that Ole Miss team was top 5 in the country in 2009 until they got to that Egg Bowl. So who knows? But if this team does what that team did, and they were showing progress and they were being competitive in those kind of games, I think there will be a lot of excitement going into year 2. And that second Dan Mullen team was really good. So we'll see if Jeff Lebby can produce similar results here.
Rob, before I get you out of here, I want to ask you about this. The Egg Bowl, like you mentioned, that rivalry, it's one of the best in all of college football, really college sports, and probably one of the most underrated as well for folks who haven't been around it. I mean, it is pure hatred. There's not a lot of love lost in that one. Back at SEC Media Days, Mississippi State's John Lewis said this, quote, "This is our state, Everybody knows that. We run the SIP because we run Mississippi. We've been saying it. They're just following us, so it's okay. They literally want to be us. Obviously, we understand where the two programs are right now, but your thoughts on sort of the Mississippi State bringing the energy when it comes to the rivalry, and I guess what you're expecting from that game, because with comments like that, I'm sure they won't be forgotten anytime soon.
No, that'll probably be on the bulletin boards for a while. I loved that comment because I love any kind of petty thing the rivalry brings, and it hasn't really had a whole lot of that the last few years. Lane Kiffin and Mike Leach were fairly close, and there wasn't a whole lot of that back and forth back then. So it's been missing that a little bit. This rivalry, I don't know if people realize just how heated and crazy it is until you break down some of the things that have happened over the last 100 plus years. Ole Miss wanted to separate itself from the agriculture, education, military school students that Mississippi State had. So these two schools couldn't be any more different, and they're only an hour and a half away from each other. So it's always been there. It's always going to be there. And John Lewis kind of pulled the Ole Miss card. They want to be. That's what State people hear from Ole Miss all the time is they want to be us. Their little brother, stuff like that. That's like the Ole Miss thing. It was kind of blowing some people's minds, especially the Ole Miss people that I was around at SEC Media Days, that a Mississippi State person said that. It was like their minds couldn't comprehend it. So, I love the pettiness. I think we're going to see a lot of it. This year, I have no idea what to expect in that game. I'll say this, in last year's ball game, as bad as Mississippi State was, that was a competitive ball game from start to finish. The offense just really couldn't do anything. But State was in that ball game, and there have been very few games, in the last, 20 years or so, since these 30 years, I guess, since this series started to move back to, the schools instead of being played in Jackson. There's been very few games that have been, massacres. This is usually a very competitive series. So that game could be very interesting if you get into it and Mississippi State has, say, 5 wins or 6 wins or something. Ole Miss has a couple of losses, is fighting for a playoff spot. That could be a very interesting game, even with the two teams that far apart as far as, what they're fighting for. So there always seems to be something on the line between the two fan bases and the two teams. So I'm very interested to see what happens this year. But I'm expecting some big things for Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin this season.
Robbie Faulk of Maroon and White Daily, co-host of the Thunder and Lightning podcast, also works with Starkville Daily News. Robbie, appreciate you taking the time. Let folks know where they can check out all your work, because certainly there is a ton of it with kickoff approaching.
Yeah, if you're a Mississippi State fan and you happen to not be subscribed already, come see us at Maroon and White Daily. Even if you're not, we'd love to have you over there at Maroon and White Daily at On 3. We've made some tremendous strides since the site started last football season. Paul Jones took it over. Paul Jones does a great job for us covering football, recruiting, and he and I tag team on all the other sports. So we try to do our best and having a wide range of coverage on this beat. So you want to come check us out. If you're an SEC fan and you're just looking to hear about other teams, we would love for you to subscribe to our podcast, Thunder and Lightning. Very big in Nepal. I don't know if you knew this. We were the #1 sports news podcast in Nepal, according to Chartable. So
very nice.
Talk to the people of Nepal if you want to know exactly what to expect with Thunder and Lightning. But 5 days a week, Mississippi State Sports Podcast. On Wednesdays, we have the Rumblings Podcast, which is questions from fans about things from Mississippi State football to rank your favorite cheesecakes. So you come check us out there. And then, if you're in Mississippi and you love high school sports, you can subscribe to Starkville Daily News. I cover Starkville Daily News areas, high school sports there in Mississippi State sports. And we've been around since 1917. So you can come check us out there if you love some Mississippi high school sports.
Robbie Faulk, one of the best in the business. Robbie, appreciate you taking the time, my friend, and we'll do it again soon.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.